February 14, 1942. Converse Laboratory Basement, Harvard University. The chemical breakthrough. A match flickered in the darkness. As Professor Louis Fisher ignited a small sample of jellied gasoline, the flame didn't explode. Like ordinary fuel, it clung, burned, and refused to die. Aluminum naphthenate and aluminum palmitate, Pfizer noted in his laboratory journal, creates a gel consistency similar to applesauce, then thickens to rubber. The 42-year-old organic chemistry professor set down his pen and reached for the secure telephone. What he had just created would change the nature of warfare in the Pacific, a weapon that could penetrate the deepest caves, breach the strongest bunkers, destroy what bombs could not touch. Professor Pfizer had no idea that his Valentine's Day discovery would lead to the most devastating incendiary campaign in military history. The Pacific War had taught American forces a brutal lesson. Japanese defenders did not surrender. They dug in, fortified, and fought from positions that conventional weapons couldn't destroy. The volcanic islands of the Pacific offered perfect defensive terrain. Caves honeycombed through rock, concrete bunkers reinforced with coral, underground passages stretching for miles. Iwo Jima alone contained 11 miles of subterranean fortifications. Okinawa's defenders had turned ancient burial tombs into machine gun nests. Conventional bombs bounced off. Artillery shells barely scratched the surface. Something new was needed. Something that could reach into the depths where Japanese soldiers waited. The answer came from an unlikely source, a Harvard chemistry professor who had been working on synthetic rubber when war broke out. A man who initially opposed developing poison gas but swallowed his pride when his country called. Louis Frederick Pfizer, born in Columbus, Ohio on April 7, 1899, who had spent years synthesizing vitamin K and studying blood coagulation, was about to become the father of modern incendiary warfare. The first field test occurred on July 4, 1942, not in some remote military facility, but on Harvard's soccer field between the business school and the stadium. Pfizer placed 45 pounds of his new compound into a shallow pool of water. The Cambridge Fire Department stood by nervously. Tennis players on nearby courts had no idea what was about to happen. The white phosphorus igniter triggered the napalm. Flaming globs of gel erupted into the air, splashing into the water, where they continued burning. The tennis players yelped and scattered. The gel stuck to everything it touched. Water couldn't extinguish it. It burned at temperatures ranging from 800 to 1,200 C. Pfizer's calculations were precise. His new weapon burned 6 times hotter than thermite, unlike gasoline, which exploded in a massive fireball. Napalm projected in a tight stream that could be directed into cave openings, bunker slits, pillboxes. The aluminum soap compounds gave it a consistency that made it stick to surfaces, too uniform to skin. Standard incendiary bombs achieved kills in 1 attack out of 60 attempts in early trials. Napalm achieved success in 1 attack out of 3. The statistics were compelling, but the chemistry was revolutionary. Production began immediately at Nurex Products. By mid-April 1942, they had developed a brown, dry powder that looked harmless enough. Mixed with gasoline, it transformed into something terrifying. The Chemical Warfare Service ordered thousands of tons. Dow Chemical ramped up production. By 1943, America was producing 500,000 pounds of napalm. By 1944, that number had risen to 8 million. The M69 incendiary bomb was designed specifically for napalm deployment. Each bomb weighed 6.2 pounds and contained jellied gasoline that would spray across a 15-foot diameter. 38 M69 South were packed into an E-46 cluster bomb. When dropped from altitude, the cluster would open at 2,000 feet, scattering the individual bombs across a target zone. But first, napalm would see combat in Europe. In August 1943, American forces used it during the Allied invasion of Sicily. However, its true test would come against Japanese fortifications that had proven impervious to conventional attack. July 22, 1944. Tinian Island, Marianas Chain. The Pacific debut. Captain Robert Johnson of the 2nd Marine Division watched Army Air Force fighter bombers approach from the east. These weren't carrying conventional bombs. The aircraft were loaded with the first napalm weapons to be used in the Pacific theater. The incendiary gel, shipped in secret from Hawaii, was about to be tested against an enemy that had turned defense into an art form. The Japanese garrison on Tinian, commanded by Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, had spent months preparing defensive works. The 50th Infantry Regiment and attached units, nearly 9,000 men, had excavated caves into the island's coral cliffs. Machine gun nests covered every approach. Artillery was hidden in reverse slope positions, immune to naval bombardment. When the first napalm bombs fell on Tinian, Marines watching from Saipan, just 6 miles away, witnessed something unprecedented. Instead of the sharp explosions of high-explosive bombs, orange flames rolled across Japanese fortifications like a tidal wave of fire. The incendiary mixture penetrated cave openings, flowed into bunkers, seeped through firing slits. Japanese soldiers who had survived weeks of naval bombardment fled their positions, uniforms ablaze. The burning petroleum adhered to everything. Stop, drop, and roll only spread it further. Water from canteens caused it to splatter. The only escape was to abandon the position entirely. Marine Corporal James Chen, observing through binoculars, noted in his diary, "The Japs came out of holes we didn't even know existed. They rolled in the dirt trying to put it out, but it just kept burning." Within days, Marine units were requesting napalm strikes before every advance. Japanese emplacements that had required hours of costly assault to neutralize were cleared in minutes. Tinian fell on August 1st. Of the 9,000 Japanese defenders, only 313 survived. The success of Tinian was just the beginning. On Saipan, Marine flame tank operators had discovered that portable flamethrowers achieved similar effects at close range. The M2 flamethrower could project thickened fuel up to 40 yards, but the operators, carrying 70 pounds of fuel on their backs, had a casualty rate exceeding 90% once they revealed their position. The solution came from Navy CBS, who modified Sherman tanks with CBH-1 flamethrowers. These Zippo tanks, as Marines called them, could project liquid fire up to 150 yards while providing armor protection for the operators. 8 such tanks landed on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. What happened next would demonstrate napalm's terrifying effectiveness against the most fortified positions in the Pacific. February 23, 1945. Iwo Jima, the volcanic inferno. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams crept toward a Japanese pillbox, dragging his M2 flamethrower through volcanic ash. His unit had been stopped by interlocking fields of fire from concrete emplacements. Artillery hadn't worked. Naval gunfire had failed. Conventional assault meant suicide. Williams could see the barrel of a Japanese Type 92 machine gun protruding from a firing slit. Bullets sparked off the steel tanks on his back. 20 yards, 15 yards. At 10 yards, he triggered the igniter. A stream of thickened fuel shot through the slit. The bunker became a furnace. Temperatures inside exceeded those of a crematorium in seconds. The concrete itself began to crack from thermal shock. Steel reinforcement bars warped and bent. The machine gun's barrel turned cherry red, then white, then melted. No one inside could have survived more than seconds. Williams crawled to the next position, an underground complex connected by passages. He noticed a ventilation shaft barely 6 inches wide. The flamethrower nozzle fit perfectly. One trigger pull sent flaming gel flowing through the entire system. Japanese soldiers emerged from hidden exits 50 yards away, their bodies wreathed in flames that couldn't be extinguished. And for hours, Williams neutralized 7 major fortifications. Positions that had stopped an entire Marine regiment were cleared by one man with a flamethrower. He would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions, but the real hero was the weapon he carried. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, the Japanese commander on Iwo Jima, had spent a year turning the island into a fortress. His defensive doctrine was simple: make the Americans pay for every yard with blood. His 21,000 troops had excavated miles of passages through solid volcanic rock. They had stockpiled food, water, and ammunition for a months-long siege. Kurabayashi had studied American tactics, knew their reliance on superior firepower. He positioned his defenses on reverse slopes where naval guns couldn't reach. He forbade suicidal banzai charges, ordering his men to fight from fortified positions until death. He believed he had created an impregnable defense. He had not accounted for napalm. The modified Sherman tanks arrived on the second day of battle. Captain Frank Caldwell of the 26th Marines watched the first SIPO tank advance on an underground fortress that had resisted to days of assault. The tank's flamethrower erupted, sending a stream of burning petroleum 100 yards into the cave mouth. The incendiary mixture flowed like water, finding every passage, every chamber, every hiding place. The whole mountain seemed to exhale smoke, Caldwell reported. Then we heard the screaming. Japanese soldiers emerged from caves, their clothing and skin aflame. Those who made it out were cut down by Marine riflemen. Those who stayed inside were incinerated. The subterranean complex, which military planners had estimated would take a week to clear, was neutralized in 20 minutes. The 8 flame tanks on Iwo Jima consumed 10,000 gallons of thickened fuel per day. Each tank required a support team of CBS for maintenance and refueling. Electricians made Joseph cool, and shipfitter J.T. Patterson worked around the clock to keep the weapons operational, often under enemy fire. The psychological impact was immediate. Japanese soldiers who had fought fearlessly against conventional weapons fled at the sight of flame tanks. Radio intercepts revealed growing panic in Japanese communications. Words like demon fire and dragon tanks appeared in decoded messages. Private Toshio Yamada, one of the few Japanese survivors of Iwo Jima, later testified, "We were trained to die for the emperor. We were prepared for bullets, shells, even bayonets. But the fire was something else. It came into our caves like a living thing. You couldn't fight it. You couldn't hide from it. It found everyone." By March 1945, napalm had proven so effective that General Curtis LeMay made a decision that would change the course of the war. If incendiary gel could clear caves and bunkers, what could it do to cities? March 9, 1945, 5:30 for p.m., Northfield, Guam. Operation Meeting House. Major General Curtis LeMay watched the first of 334 B-29 superfortresses roll down the runway. Each bomber carried a lethal cargo, 40 cluster bombs containing 1,520 M69 incendiary devices. Their target, Tokyo. LeMay had struggled for months with high-altitude precision bombing. Jet streams over Japan pushed bombers off course. Cloud cover obscured targets. Anti-aircraft fire at 30,000 feet was deadly accurate. Results were dismal. After taking command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, LeMay knew he had to try something different or face relief. The arithmetic of destruction was compelling. One incendiary cluster could destroy an area 100 feet by 300 feet. Tokyo's residential districts were densely packed with wooden houses, paper walls, and straw mats. Japanese war production depended on thousands of small factories scattered throughout residential areas. What precision bombing couldn't hit, area incendiary attack could destroy. LeMay stripped the B-29s of defensive guns to carry more ordnance. He ordered them to fly at night at low altitude, between 5,000 and 9,000 feet. The lower altitude would improve accuracy and put them below the effective range of Japanese anti-aircraft guns. The Pathfinder aircraft arrived over Tokyo just after midnight on March 10th. They marked the target area, a 3-by-4-mile residential district housing 750,000 people, with incendiary bombs in an X pattern. The main force followed, dropping 1,665 tons of incendiaries in streams that created a grid of fire. Within 30 minutes, individual fires emerged into a firestorm. Ground-level heat approached that of molten lava. The superheated air created winds exceeding 100 miles per hour, sucking oxygen from bomb shelters, feeding the flames with fresh air. Concrete boiled, steel melted, the Sumida River turned to steam. Fire Captain Susumu Takahashi of the Tokyo Fire Department logged his final report at 12:48 a.m. Fire beyond control. Equipment useless. The city is dying. Tokyo's fire department had 8,000 men, 1,000 pieces of equipment, and exactly 3 ladder trucks capable of reaching beyond 30 feet. They had trained for conventional bombing, prepared for normal fires. Nothing had prepared them for this inferno. The gel stuck to their equipment, melted their hoses, turned their water into scalding steam. By dawn, 16 square miles of Tokyo had been incinerated. Conservative estimates placed the death toll at 87,500, though Japanese sources suggest over 100,000 perished that night. More people died in the Tokyo firestorm than would die in either atomic bombing. 1 million were left homeless. B-29 Tail Gunner Sergeant James C.R. reported, at 5,000 feet, you could smell the burning flesh. The thermal updrafts from the fire were so strong they threw our 65-ton bomber around like a leaf. But LeMay was just getting started. The systematic incineration of Japan had begun. March 11th brought the destruction of Nagoya as 313 B-29s eliminated the Mitsubishi aircraft engine plant and surrounding districts. 2 days later, Osaka's industrial heart was consumed by flames that burned for 72 hours. March 16th saw Kobe's port facilities and shipyards reduced to twisted metal and ash. In 10 days, incendiary raids had destroyed more Japanese industrial capacity than 2 years of conventional bombing. The Air Force was consuming napalm faster than American factories could produce it. Emergency production facilities were established. By June 1945, monthly production approached unprecedented levels. The tactical lessons learned from cave clearing in the islands were being applied strategically to Japan itself. April 1, 1945. Okinawa, the final crucible. If Iwo Jima had been hell, Okinawa was something worse. The island's 450,000 civilians were caught between 100,000 Japanese defenders and 180,000 American attackers. The Japanese had turned every tomb, every cave, every hill into a defensive bastion. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had learned from Iwo Jima. His troops dug deeper, fortified stronger, and prepared for flame attack. They installed water reservoirs in caves, created fire breaks in passages, and developed crude protective gear from wet cloth and mud. It proved futile. The 713th Tank Battalion had been entirely converted to flame tanks for Okinawa. 54 Sherman tanks equipped with Ronson flamethrowers, capable of projecting incendiary streams 60 to 80 yards. The Navy's chemical units had prepared 150,000 gallons of thickened fuel. Every Marine rifle company had attached flamethrower teams. The battle for Wana Ridge demonstrated napalm's evolution as a tactical weapon. Japanese defenders had created interlocking fortifications on reverse slopes, immune to artillery and air attack. Marines of the 1st Division spent 3 days trying to advance 100 yards, suffering massive casualties. On May 14th, Marines implemented an innovative tactic. They hauled barrels of the incendiary mixture to the ridgetop, punctured them with rifle fire, and rolled them down into Japanese positions. White phosphorus grenades ignited the flowing gel. The entire draw became a cauldron of flame. Defensive works that had resisted for days were cleared in hours. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, observing the attack, wrote, "The Japanese came running out of caves we didn't know existed, their clothes and bodies on fire. Some tried to surrender, but it was too late. The napalm had already done its work. They collapsed after a few steps, the fire still burning even after they were dead." The psychological impact on Japanese civilians was devastating. Thousands had taken shelter in caves following military instructions. When flame tanks approached, they faced an impossible choice: burn in the caves or emerge into machine gun fire. On May 30th, Marines discovered a cave containing 450 civilians near Shuri Castle. Lieutenant John Stevens of the 6th Marine Division attempted to convince them to surrender. When they refused, military necessity took over. The flame tank crew gave 3 warnings in Japanese. No response. The flamethrower ignited, sending its deadly stream deep into the cave system. Stevens later testified, "We could hear them screaming for 5 minutes, then silence. When we finally entered, we found mostly women and children. The flames had consumed all the oxygen. Most had suffocated before the fire reached them. It was a mercy, I suppose." The Army Chemical Warfare Service documented every engagement. Flame tanks on Okinawa consumed 100,000 gallons of thickened petroleum. Underground fortresses that would have required weeks to clear with conventional weapons were neutralized in hours. Japanese bastions that had stopped entire divisions were overcome by flame tank sections. But the cost in civilian lives was staggering. Estimates suggest that flame weapons were responsible for at least 20,000 civilian deaths on Okinawa. Though exact figures remain disputed, the weapon that had been developed to save American lives was indiscriminate in its destruction. Colonel Unmack's flamethrower group had grown from a handful of CBS to a major military organization. Production facilities in Hawaii operated continuously. Training programs graduated hundreds of flame tank operators monthly. the industrial might of America had turned Pfizer's laboratory discovery into mass production. By summer 1945, the transformation was complete. The Pacific War had become a conflagration. The air campaign has climax. July-August 1945. General Lemay SP-29s were now conducting incendiary raids with mechanical precision. The target list expanded from major cities to smaller industrial towns. Intelligence identified 180 Japanese urban areas suitable for firebombing. By late July, 67 cities had been attacked with varying degrees of destruction, some losing entire districts, others suffering damage to key industrial areas. The scope of destruction defied comprehension. Each B-29 could carry 40 cluster bombs. A 300-plane raid could deliver nearly 500,000 individual incendiary devices. Every bomb created a pool of flame 15 feet in diameter that burned for 6 minutes at temperatures that could melt aluminum. Japanese firefighting doctrine had completely collapsed. Throughout July, city after city was targeted. Fukui lost 60% of its urban area on July 19th. Matsuyama saw 3/4 consumed on July 26th, while Tsu suffered 85% destruction on July 28th. The systematic campaign continued with industrial efficiency, each raid perfecting the techniques learned from the previous one. Japanese industrial production plummeted. Workers refused to enter factories, knowing they were targets. Transportation systems collapsed as rail yards burned. Food distribution failed as warehouses were incinerated. The home front that had sustained Japan's war effort for 4 years was dying under cascading waves of petroleum flame. Prince Fumimaro Kanu, former prime minister, wrote in his diary, "The Americans have found our weakness. We built a nation of wood and paper. Now they are burning it down city by city. There is no defense against this demon fire." The Japanese military attempted countermeasures. They created fire breaks by demolishing entire city blocks. They built underground shelters with multiple exits. They distributed primitive protective equipment made from treated cloth. None of it worked. The burning petroleum found its way into every shelter, every hiding place, every refuge. Dr. Yoshio Nishina, Japan's leading physicist, was tasked with developing defenses. His report to the Imperial General Headquarters was bleak. The gel's adhesive properties make it impossible to remove once ignited. Its combustion temperature exceeds our material's tolerance. The only defense is to prevent the enemy from delivering it. Since we have lost air superiority, there is no defense. August 1st, 1945. Preparations for invasion, Operation Downfall. The invasion of Japan was scheduled for November. Military planners studied the lessons of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Japanese defensive preparations on Kyushu were extensive. Intelligence identified 10,000 caves, 5,000 bunkers, and elaborate underground networks. Conventional assault would cost an estimated 1 million American casualties. The solution was incendiary warfare on an unprecedented scale. Plans called for 75 flame tank battalions, over 4,000 tanks. Chemical units would stockpile 5 million gallons of thickened fuel. Every rifle company would have organic flamethrower squads. B-29s would conduct rolling firebombings ahead of ground forces. Undersecretary of War Robert Patterson gave flame tank production the same priority as the Manhattan Project. The entire industrial capacity of America was being mobilized to produce incendiary weapons, but the invasion would never come. August 6, 1945. Hiroshima. The atomic bomb killed 70,000 instantly. The world gasped at the destruction of a city by a single bomb. But Curtis LeMay was unimpressed. His firebombing raids had already attacked 67 cities, with many suffering extensive destruction. Tokyo alone had suffered more deaths than Hiroshima. The atomic bomb was spectacular, but incendiary raids had done more cumulative damage. August 9th, Nagasaki, another atomic bomb, another city destroyed. But that same night, 95 B-29s dropped conventional incendiaries on Yawata. The conflagration burned for 2 days. August 14th witnessed the last major raid. Even as Japanese officials discussed surrender terms, 160 B-29s attacked Kamagaya and Isesaki, the flames continuing to burn as diplomats negotiated. August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. In his speech, he mentioned a new and most cruel bomb, referring to the atomic weapons. He did not mention the weapon that had destroyed more of his nation than any other. The statistics were overwhelming. Between March and August 1945, incendiary raids had destroyed 180 square miles across 67 Japanese cities, killed between 300,000 and 500,000 civilians, left 8 million homeless, and eliminated 40% of industrial capacity. A 1946 National Defense Research Council report documented that 40,000 tons of M69 incendiary bombs had been dropped on Japan throughout the war. The Pacific War ended not with an atomic flash, but with the dying embers of countless fires. The reckoning. Professor Louis Fischer returned to Harvard to his chemistry laboratory, where it all began. He had been awarded the Medal for Merit, the nation's highest civilian honor. His invention shortened the war, saved countless American lives, and revolutionized warfare. But the victory was bitter. In 1967, during the Vietnam War, Fischer watched television footage of napalm strikes, children running down roads, their bodies aflame, villages incinerated. The weapon he created to destroy enemy fortifications was being used against populated areas. In June 1972, Fischer wrote to President Nixon, urging an international ban. When we developed napalm, we never thought of anti-personnel use. We were thinking of structures, fortifications. I have no right to judge the morality of napalm just because I invented it, but I believe its use should be restricted. Edward David Jr., Nixon's science advisor, replied that napalm use was difficult to predict or control, offering only that the suggestion would receive careful attention. Fischer called it a brush-off. He died in 1977. His obituary in Harvard Gazette mentioned his work on vitamin K and antimalarial drugs. No mention of napalm. The university had quietly erased the weapon from his official legacy. The tactical revolution was complete. The age of static fortification had ended. No bunker was safe from flowing flames. No cave deep enough to escape the incendiary torrent. The volcanic fortresses of the Pacific, carved from solid rock and defended with fanatical determination, had fallen to a weapon developed in a Harvard basement. The 713th Tank Battalion was deactivated in 1946. The flame tanks were scrapped, their specialized equipment destroyed. The CBS who had created them returned to civilian life. Colonel Unmack's flamethrower group was disbanded, its records classified. Veterans rarely spoke of what they had witnessed. Marine Corporal Raymond Hart, who served on Iwo Jima, would only say, "The flamethrowers got it done." Woody Williams, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima, focused his post-war efforts on Gold Star families, never discussing the weapon that made him famous. Eugene Sledge wrote, "We thought the Japanese were cruel. Then we brought flamethrowers. War makes monsters of everyone." The military implications were clear. Technology had overcome determination. Chemistry had defeated courage. Industrial capacity had proved more decisive than warrior spirit. The samurai tradition that had sustained Japan for centuries perished in petroleum flames. Modern military doctrine incorporated the lessons. Every major military developed flame weapons. International law attempted to regulate incendiary weapons. The 1980 Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons restricted but did not ban their use. The weapon that had ended one war would feature in many others. The scientific legacy proved complex. Research into jellied petroleum led to developments in polymer chemistry, fire suppression technology, and material science. The same aluminum soap compounds that made gasoline adhesive found applications in industry and medicine. Knowledge gained from studying thermal effects led to advances in burn treatment. But the moral questions remained unanswered. Was the firebombing of Tokyo a war crime? Were the civilian deaths on Okinawa justified by military necessity? Did incendiary warfare shorten the conflict enough to justify its horrors? Historians continue to debate these questions, finding no easy answers. Japanese survivors formed the Association of Tokyo Air Raid Victims, documenting testimonies, preserving memories. Museums in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe display melted artifacts, photographs of devastation, lists of victims. School children learn about the night of black snow when burning debris fell like dark precipitation. The transformation of warfare was complete. The Pacific War had begun with torpedo planes at Pearl Harbor and ended with the systematic incineration of Japan. Between those events, the nature of combat had fundamentally changed. Individual skill and courage still mattered, but technology and industrial production determined outcomes. In the caves of Iwo Jima, coral formations show scorch marks from flame tanks, still visible 8 decades later. On Okinawa, sealed caves contain the remains of those who chose death over surrender to the flames. In Tokyo, memorial parks mark areas where entire neighborhoods vanished in single nights. Professor Pfizer's formula was elegantly simple: aluminum naphthenate plus aluminum palmitate plus gasoline equals napalm. The calculus of war had become chemistry. The chemistry of destruction had become industrial production. The age of limited war was over. Standing in the ruins of Tokyo in September 1945, General Curtis LeMay surveyed the devastation. "We scorched and boiled and baked to death more people in Tokyo that night than went up in vapor at Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined," he observed. But it was war. They started it. We finished it. The Pacific Ocean had witnessed the birth of modern total war, not through atomic weapons that grabbed headlines, but through a humble gel that burned unquenchably. Napalm had changed warfare forever. The weapon born in a Harvard basement had killed more Japanese than any other American weapon. It had consumed a nation that believed itself divinely protected. The strategic bombing survey conducted after the war reached a stark conclusion. Japan would have surrendered by November 1945, even without the atomic bombs, even without Soviet entry. The systematic firebombing campaign, more than any other factor, had broken Japan's ability to continue fighting. For the scientist who developed these weapons, the moral burden proved heavy. Louis Pfizer was not alone in his regrets. Many chemists and engineers who worked on incendiary weapons struggled with the consequences of their creations. The CBS who modified the flame tanks left few records. These construction battalions, trained to build, had become instruments of destruction. For Japanese survivors, the trauma lasted generations. Children who fled through burning streets grew up with recurring nightmares. The smell of gasoline could trigger panic attacks decades later. Burn scars served as permanent reminders. Yet from this destruction came an unexpected result. The same Japan reduced to ashes by American firebombing would become one of America's strongest allies. The cities that had been incinerated rose again as centers of commerce and culture. Tokyo, which suffered the most devastating single raid in history, became one of the world's great metropolises. In militaries worldwide, the Pacific firebombing campaign is studied as both a masterpiece of strategic execution and a cautionary tale about the nature of total war. The integration of tactical and strategic incendiary warfare showed how a single weapon system could scale from individual bunkers to entire cities. Modern international law has attempted to address these issues. The Protocol on Prohibitions or Restrictions on the Use of Incendiary Weapons, adopted in 1980, restricts but does not eliminate their use. Military necessity still often trumps humanitarian concerns. In Japan, memory of the firebombing serves different purposes. For some, it's a reminder of militarism's consequences. For others, evidence of war's brutality. For most, simply a human tragedy that should never be repeated. Annual commemorations are attended by fewer survivors each year. American memory of the firebombing is more ambiguous. The atomic bombings dominate the narrative. The systematic incineration that killed more is reduced to footnotes. This selective memory serves a purpose. It's easier to grapple with 2 atomic bombs than months of systematic firebombing. The technological progression from Pfizer's laboratory to Tokyo's ruins took just 3 years. In that time, napalm evolved from a curiosity to the most destructive conventional weapon deployed. Today, napalm and its derivatives remain in military arsenals. The principle unchanged: jellied fuel that sticks and burns. Professor Pfizer spent his final years teaching and writing chemistry textbooks with his wife, Mary. He rarely spoke of napalm, preferring to focus on other achievements. But the weight of his creation never left him. In private moments, he wondered what might have been different. These were pointless questions, he knew. If not him, someone else. The chemistry was too simple, the military was too great, the industrial capacity too vast. The weapon was inevitable once modern chemistry met modern war. The fundamental truth revealed by napalm's use remains: in total war, there are no limits to human ingenuity in creating destruction. The same industrial capacity that improves life can be turned to ending it massively. As the last survivors pass away, their memories become history. The burn scars fade, destroyed cities rebuilt, trauma processed, but the capacity for such destruction remains. The war ended, the flames died, but the questions napalm raised burned on. The lesson was clear. In the age of total war, victory belonged to those who could produce the most terrible weapons and possess the will to use them. Japan's defensive positions, carved from volcanic rock and defended with suicidal courage, had collapsed under American incendiary assault. The Fortress Pacific had burned, and from its ashes rose the modern world, forever changed by a weapon born in a university laboratory, tested on a soccer field, and deployed across an ocean of islands until it consumed an empire.